Coming up, first and foremost, we take a look at the New York Football Giants matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars as they look to improve to 6-1 on the season this weekend, but also some NFL ground-shaking moves get made here from a trade perspective. We take a look at Christian McCaffrey, what the San Francisco 49ers were willing to pay, and if other desperate teams on the market might come knocking on Joe Schoen's door. Beyond that as well, some nice narratives around key young players like Daniel Bellinger and a global perspective on Daniel Jones and where that QB value is, both in the short and long term. Yes, friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, as you know, I am your host, Adam Armbrecht, covering not only the Giants, but also the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy, Doug Norrie. No Andrew Makowitz today. He is in transit. Business came a calling for him. So while he's taking a few flights across the country, and while we are apologetic for not being in with some of that current content over the last couple of days, very excited to spend a little bit of time here on a Friday. Going to do kind of a unique show over on YouTube. Obviously, we welcome everybody over on the live stream. We're going to focus on the matchup with the Jaguars. Then we're also going to take a look at this Christian McCaffrey trade, what it maybe potentially could mean for the New York Football Giants, and then also a bit of an outsider's perspective on where things stand with Daniel Jones. So a little bit of a global perspective on the season. We're going to do more of this as we get to the bye week. But again, because we weren't around these last couple of days, want to give a little bit of extra content here. So we'll take a couple of brief breaks in between and really try to give you everything that you can handle from a New York Football Giants perspective heading into the weekend. Be sure to join us on Saturday, tomorrow, when we will be doing our traditional third segment, taking a look at the betting lines, taking a look at the over-under, the matchups, and of course, Andy's bet of the week. So all those things will be coming up on Saturday as well, as I try to get myself adjusted a little bit here. But just to start things out, as we also say a good morning to Marty. Did he tell? Yeah, I know. So don't worry. As I see Marty asking the question, we will get to the bet of the week tomorrow. No, it has not officially been given in. And quite frankly, we need to do a little fact checking here and go back and take a look at how he's been running, because Andy's been giving some pretty reasonable, right, safe plays to get a little bit of coin in your pocket. Keep an eye on how he's faring so we can tell you whether or not you should keep going down that Andy well with him. We also take a brief moment here at the top to remind you that today's episode, and really most of our episodes, are brought to you by our friends over at BetStamp. You can go over to BetStamp. We talked about them before on our betting segments. We talk about you want to throw down $20 on the New York Football Giants. Well, if you're looking at taking the points or taking them on the money line, you get over to BetStamp, and you're going to be able to take a look at all of the betting websites, find out what your best odds are going to be to get the best bang for your buck. Be sure to check them out as well. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the matchup. So it was interesting. I wasn't looking at this game against the Jaguars and thinking, we talked about it earlier in the week, talked about it even, I think, right after on the post game where the Giants came out as an early underdog against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay. And we know when you're talking about playing away, the 3-point swing, right, versus neutral site versus being at home. But even at that point, we're talking about this being a bit of a coin flip scenario, and the line has moved a little bit, and we'll talk about that again when Andy's back in. But there was a little bit, I had a little bit of reservation around this game, not from the standpoint of where the Giants are and liking what I'm seeing from Daniel Jones and his growth over these last few weeks specifically, where I think the legs have been taken away at times from the injury and from the other opposing defenses, and he's done it with his arm, right? Put together some key sustained drives when they needed it most. And we can now go back. I think, when we get to the midway point of this season, we're going to be able to look back and probably count up 10, 12, maybe more drives throughout the course of a game, whether it's first quarter, fourth quarter, and there's times when it's more significant, where Daniel Jones was there under center helping to orchestrate it. Now, when you go back and look at early in the season, it felt more like Daniel Jones, yes, was the man under center, but a lot of the work was being done by Saquon Barkley. As we've progressed through the season, we've now started to see a little bit of this blend. Some of it may be out of necessity because going back, Saquon Barkley landing on his shoulder, maybe doesn't have the full juice right now. And then, as you would anticipate, defense is starting to say, hey, if we're getting down to this point where we're either going to play safe and lay back in coverage and be ridiculed for letting Saquon Barkley carve us up every single play, then let's go ahead and put some pressure on Daniel Jones. And he's answered that bell. So that's been really impressive to see from him. But when I was looking at you go over and you think about this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And there's a couple of ways that we can even go about this. At first, I was just thinking, let's just take a look at those stat lines, right? Where are these teams? And the factor that doesn't seem to get accounted for here, which I think Andy brought up when we were initially talking about this matchup and where the line sat, it's the coaching factor, right? Every single week, I'm trying to think back if there was one where we just felt like it was on the coaching staff mistakes were made. They haven't been perfect, but by and large, every single week, we find ourselves singing the praises of the coaching staff for what they've been able to accomplish. So usually it's a net positive. We know Doug Peterson is going to be across the way there for the Jaguars. We know that he was, of course, the villain for the New York Football Giants fans in his time in Philadelphia. So I just went over and looked at the baseline stats. Jacksonville right now is a top 14, top 12 in passing yards per game. Total yards per game. 357, almost 358 yards offensively per game. Now, again, when we talk about the balance that this team has brought for their on both sides of the ball, they're only throwing for what ends up being somewhere towards the back half of the league, 221, but they are rushing for 136 yards per game. And that's going to be good for, again, another top 10 finish there. So your top 12 offense overall, your passing game has struggled at times, but your running game has helped to carry that load. And when you go even deeper and take a look inside the stats, again, 1,400 yards for Trevor Lawrence. And in some regards, we'd say, hey, we'd love to have Daniel Jones be sniffing 1,400 yards. The interesting thing to me for Trevor Lawrence is when you go game by game on him, there are, as you might expect, the kind of lines that you would want from a guy that was drafted as a franchise quarterback and still believed to be the man in Jacksonville, but ultimately comes down to getting him weapons, which, by the way, they went out and spent money, right? They brought in familiar friend on a bit of a bargain deal, Evan Ingram, but they went and made that big splash to get Christian Kirk in there and really upgrade the players around them. And yet, after starting out 2-1, which is somewhat interesting because it's been about the play. By and large, it has come down to the play of Trevor Lawrence, as it usually is for most teams in the NFL. 95 and a 71 QBR rating in the weeks 2 and 3 victories over the Colts and over the Chargers. Now, in the last 3 weeks, though, 12, 31.8, and then a 63 against the Colts in their second meeting of the year. 3 straight losses, all where he has struggled a little bit. What I found interesting was, though, even in this loss that they suffered 34-27 to the Colts, still threw for 20 of 22. So completed almost 91% of his passes, only 165 yards, right? Had 6 rushes most of his season so far, but only for 23 yards. I bring up kind of like where he's at in some of these stats because it does remind me in some ways of where the Giants are and what they're doing with Daniel Jones and what they're hoping to accomplish with him. The upside, the ceiling of Trevor Lawrence, you'd think is still much higher than Daniel Jones, at least in this moment anyway. But by a season-by-season basis, Daniel Jones is having the better year. But 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, right? So this is where I find it interesting of what are you losing or gaining in those 3 weeks where they had those losses? He hasn't looked particularly good. 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. His best 2-game stretch there is in those 2 wins against the Chargers, against the Colts, throws for 235, for 262. It really comes down to, can that offensive line hold up for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Can they give Trevor Lawrence that opportunity to have some success and have time to utilize those weapons? That's where it comes down to the fact that is Azeez Ojulari going to be out there? Have to wait and see a little bit on that. We know we got Leonard Williams back last week, so he can continue to build off of that. Another week removed for Adoree Jackson, getting healthier when it comes to the knee. And then you throw in Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence, right? And Ward and Zimenez and all the guys that we think can hopefully put some pressure onto the Jacksonville Jaguars when we look at their roster overall. Inside of the running game, then, though, we have two players here that are getting it done, right? You have Etienne Jr. and then also James Robinson, who's been around. Now, they're splitting, though. I wouldn't say splitting. 81-54. More bang for your buck with the young rookie who's come in. Sorry, second year running back who's come in, though, this season. I want to look back just relative to what's happened here. Been consistent, has never had more than 13 carries, never fewer than 8. So they've been using him, but he's steadily gotten better and better. The last 2 games, 10 attempts in each of them, 86 and 71 yards respectively. Big jump, 2.2, 3.5, 4, 7.1, and 8.6 yards per carry over these last couple of games. So there's clearly Doug Peterson in this offense is starting to identify the guys that can have impact plays for them on a consistent basis and how to fold them in. Likewise, when we look at James Robinson, what has looked different for him over these last handful of games? Nothing terribly dramatic outside of the fact that the last 3 and the losses, he's all had a significant reduction in the number of carries that he's seen. 8, 10, and 12, and the yards per carry have been kind of muddled. His best game, really his only truly impressive game this season, came in week 2 against the Chargers. 17 carries, 100 yards, a 5.9 clip. He's been relatively pedestrian. Did a better job in this last game. And it looks like they're trying to strike this balance of how do we maximize what Robinson is getting for us, use the explosiveness of our second running back, and navigate our way to some victories here. But still, now you're talking about getting into 20, 25 carries here between your running backs room when a lot of the sample size tells you you need to get into the passing game if you're ultimately going to have success. In that regard, right on down the line we go. Christian Kirk, 25 catches on 44 targets for 362, has the 4 touchdowns. Here'd be my problem from the Jacksonville Jaguars standpoint and the benefit from a New York Football Giants standpoint. Christian Kirk is 5'11", 200 pounds. We know they went out and gave him the big contract to get him over here. When you go back and take a look at his stats on a year-to-year basis and his time in Arizona, I'm taking a look. I was just curious to see. He did 43 on 68, 68 on 107, 48 on 79, 77 on 103. By most metrics, though, if you extrapolated out his season right now on 90 targets, he'd have 50 catches. Like, he's trending way closer to being a 50-50 ball kind of guy than I think you want him to be, right? Go back to just last season, 77 catches on 103 yards. So you're talking about catching 70% or more of your targets on a game-to-game basis. That matters, right? You think about Christian Kirk, you're thinking about him like a DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not talking about talent level, wherever you want to put it in the spectrum, but the bottom line being is I go high volume with this player, and I get to maximize the value of having a talent like that on the roster with consistency. And the problem that I would say here is when you look inside these games so far, well, first of all, 1 catch on 3 targets the week prior, but 9 targets in week number 3. In week number 3 there against the Eagles, only 2 catches. Now, the Eagles are a good defense. I'm not disputing that. But how are you going about getting that ball into his hands? The first 2 weeks of the season, 6 catches, 6 targets, 78. 6 catches, 9 targets, 72, right? They've got to get back to finding ways to make him explosive and make him dynamic. You're seeing this shift and getting into this running back room a little bit heavier the last few weeks, but you're not seeing the results in terms of wins and losses for Jacksonville. So these are all things, by the way, that I'm liking, that I want the Giants to be able to expose. Christian Kirk needs to prove that he's the elite number 1 level wide receiver that can be explosive with consistency down after down. The other guys inside of that room, we obviously know, listen, you can't knock Evan Ingram, 24 on 32 for 208. He's doing something. I think he still has some of his drops. We're not going to over-focus on him. And then some holdovers like Marvin Jones Jr., obviously, and then Zay Jones. Zay Jones has been pretty good, 27 catches on 37 targets. It all falls into what I'm going to call it's a meh kind of bag, right? in theory, Trevor Lawrence should be very good and should be a very dangerous quarterback in this league, but he's just not yet. He's not yet with consistency. And Doug Peterson came out after, I think, their last loss and said, we just haven't learned how to finish games. We're a young team and we haven't learned how to finish out games yet. From that standpoint, that's something that the Giants are primarily a young team with a smattering of key veterans, but they have figured out whatever their formula is. They figured out the best way for them to be able to win football games with consistency. And that can be the difference between these two teams right now in a lot of ways. Because again, when we go back to the overall stats for the league, remember, the New York Football Giants are not crushing it from a team standpoint. When we look inside those numbers and remind you that total offense, again, per game, Jacksonville is a top half of the league team. The New York Football Giants are a bottom third. They are in 30th, 28th, 26th, 24th position in yardage overall. I'm almost shocked that the New York Football Giants are sitting there at, I was reading the wrong line. Would have been totally blown away. Not shocked that they are 31st in the league right now with 154 passing yards per game. And we know the 163 rushing yards per contest is going to be good for fourth. So you have this team, the Jacksonville Jaguars are doing a bit more of it. Again, the running attack. Can the Giants once again be exposed? I go back to that Dallas Cowboys game. I go back to watching a guy watching this past week, who I'm going to forget the name of now, carve us up, ultimately in a losing effort for the Ravens. But when you have a player like that come out and seemingly just be able to have his way with your defense, it just keeps putting this blueprint out there that it's almost ironic. And I want to make sure that I call this man out by name. Kenyon Drake, that son of a gun, right? Has 119 rushing yards on just 10 carries. And then you throw in, obviously, Lamar Jackson into that mix as well. But the Giants get the win. What's fascinating to me is that so many of the teams around the league coming into games against the Giants would be served to look at how the Giants are actually winning games and try to use it against us. Good morning to Bry over there, out there in the chat as well on YouTube. Like, the template is there for other teams. We said this in the Green Bay game. Why are you having 35 plus passes, 39 total for Aaron Rodgers? Why is he throwing the ball that much in a game where you have Aaron Jones, you have AJ Dillon? No, it's not going to be sexy. But there's the world where you just grind it out and you really wear down the Giants the way that they're willing to wear teams down, and you try to get yourself down into the fourth quarter where there's an opportunity to win the game. Again, even in that weird version of it, Green Bay still had the ball in their hands with a chance to do something, and ultimately it ended up being Shane Ximenez who came through with that big play. The following week, same thing. You're in a position, Baltimore Ravens, to have a chance to do something, and yet this time it ends up being Kayvon Thibodeau with the strip sack, and then Leonard Williams with the recovery. But when you look at the stat lines, it's counterintuitive. So that's where I had concerns coming into the game, where I just thought, boy, they have the ability, they have multiple running backs they can use. Now, Robinson hasn't looked fantastic, but you have some weapons. You have, some diverse playmakers here. And typically what I've been saying is, by and large, I feel like what we've seen for the New York Football Giants is that, and this is where the tests come into play. On a week-to-week basis, I keep looking at the wide receiver rooms for the opposition and saying, are they dangerous? Can they threaten us, right? This week coming up, it'll probably be in the top 2 or 3 teams in terms of wide receiver / tight end weapons that they bring to the table. I wasn't happy about having to face Mark Andrews, but I wasn't scared about anybody else. Bateman was out for Baltimore last week. The week prior, Green Bay, we know. I think they have a lot of talent potentially at the wide receiver position, but they have a rookie in Dobbs. Christian Watson hasn't come on for them yet. And then you have some veterans, right? Tunyon, consistent tight end. So you have these possibilities, but not necessarily the dynamic playmaking that you would anticipate on a consistent basis, at least not this season. So in theory, there is an opportunity here. And I've said this now the last couple of weeks. I've called for the Giants to win both times, Green Bay and against Baltimore. But in theory, it's another one of those times where we're going to be looking at a quarterback and looking at a talent pool for them on the offensive side of the ball and saying, should they be able to have success against us? In theory, yes. But I believe in the front seven for the Giants, even though our linebacking core is depleted, something we're going to talk about here as we get through this game and think about the trade market if Joe Schoen should be doing something. But it's just, man, it's hard for me to be too scared about matchups like this because week after week, Wink Martindale and the Giants defense keeps finding ways to manufacture issues for some of these teams. Now, the last thing I'll say about Trevor Lawrence, too, and again, just to round it into form, he's high there on the list in terms of completion percentage, 65.5% on the season as well, averaging 7 yards per game, too. The long is only a 49, so there's not a lot of those big bomb plays there. And actually, if we went over to, I'll try to do this in real time, and then we'll take a little break. We'll come back in. There's still a lot to discuss on this game in and of itself, but I want to talk about some global NFL things that are going on, the Christian McCaffrey trade being chief among them. So one of the things that I just wanted to briefly take a look here on the next gen stats when it comes to QB play, because this again can be something that either can confirm or deny where you stand on a QB and just the risk factor that you feel like you're potentially running into as you get into a contest with them. So over on the one that I always like to take a look at is going to be where is at 65%. He's a little bit ways down there, a little north of 65. So we get to Trevor Lawrence, 65.5. Here would be the big difference and why this should be even more of a winnable game. I think there's some turnovers potentially coming here in this one. 68.5 expected completion percentage. So Trevor Lawrence, high profile, high draft pick, franchise quarterback, we think, is actually underperforming expectations when he has opportunities and when he has time. That matters to me when we're talking about how a team is playing, where the wins and losses are, and how specifically the quarterback is helping or hurting. Andy's favorite term, force multiplier. Trevor Lawrence has not been that yet. There's a lot of factors that go into it, offensive line play, consistency, etc. But at least in this moment, he is struggling to find that consistency when it matters most. By the way, as we've said week after week here now, Daniel Jones, 67.3 completion percentage on the season, almost 2.5, almost 3 percentage points higher than expected completion. So whether or not he's being asked to do everything, a little bit, some, it doesn't matter. In this moment right now, Daniel Jones, with what he's being asked to do, is outperforming expectations. Trevor Lawrence is struggling to meet those. And again, there's factors across the board that impact that. But as we know, QBs get judged on the wins and the losses, how they perform, the analytics, the stats that make up who they are. By the end of the year, even if you knew that a wide receiving core was dropping passes left, right, and center, it's still going to come back to what could the quarterback have done better. We'll take a little bit of a break here. We'll come in and take a look at Dr. Pancake. Morning to you, good sir. We'll take a look at Marty's comments here as well. Back in about 60 seconds to continue what is going to be a big, expansive episode of OGP here on a Friday. All right, let's keep the conversation going here. Catching my breath for a minute. Let's take a look, brief pause over in the comments here before we tap back into the defensive side of the ball for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And again, these at least coming in, some areas of concern for the New York Football Giants. And while I think we can talk about should it be expected to be a win, I think every game is going to be tough. I don't think that the Giants are the type of team that you automatically say, yeah, chalk it up to a victory. But I try to put all of my concerns on the table and then see how much can I mitigate them when talking about a particular matchup. But DJ is helping, by the way, coming in from Bride. DJ is helping by not turning the ball over 100%, right? So even in comparison here, I know we said Trevor Lawrence there with 4 turnovers, obviously, for his stat lines there, which is fine. We're neither, you wouldn't be disgusted by that. The 9-4 ratio, we're 6 games into the season. You could be talking about a player like him that is going to be close to, right, above 25 touchdowns, maybe single digits, low teens in terms of interceptions. Again, it's a convoluted, or at least a tricky conversation that we try to have around Daniel Jones, because the good stats are great. The completion percentage, the lack of turnovers, protecting the football, right? The other areas that I think make it hard for national coverage to look at this team and get excited about is that we know Daniel Jones' yardage per game is not blowing you away, right? You're not seeing down the field dynamic plays as well, which I actually do think I do want to see more of. But if we go back to this last game, and then we're actually going to talk about a couple of not only the matchups here, I'll highlight 2 key players on the Jacksonville Jaguars, but from a Giants perspective, there's a couple of guys that are obviously worth noting when we talk about getting more expansive here on the offensive side of the ball and how diverse that they can be. The hard thing for me offensively for the Giants has just been that the deep ball hasn't been there and the playmaking hasn't been there inside of the wide receiver room. So we've had this conversation all season long, and I've consistently said I'm setting a high bar for the New York Football Giants, for Daniel Jones, in order for me to say he is the franchise quarterback. And week over week, by and large, he continues to check some of those boxes. What does it mean big picture? It doesn't really matter. But what I really liked is that when we go inside the numbers, especially against Baltimore, Wan'Dale Robinson comes back in this one. Marty mentioned him in the chat about thinking that he could be poised to have a touchdown in this one as well. This is probably one of the first times, like, I just think, and we could go take a look at different games, but you've got Bellinger, we're going to touch on in a second here, 5 for 38 in the touchdown. You have Robinson, 3 for 37 in the touchdown. Marcus Johnson, 2 for 25. Darius Slayton, the lone catch, but an important 18-yard gain on a 3rd and long when you needed it, converts that play. Richie James, 2 for 18. Breida, 2 for 17. 3 for 12 for Barkley. David Sills with 1 catch for 8 yards, wouldn't you know it? But spreading the ball around and having guys that aren't necessarily, again, the big chunk play is maybe it's coming this week, maybe it's coming after the bye week when Mike Kafka and this offense and the offensive line and Daniel Jones and the weapons are healthy enough, there enough, and all on the same page when it comes to the playbook to say, let's try to take a couple of these looks. But when you're winning football games, this is all that you're asking for, is consistency out of that wide receiver room, making the catches when you need to move the chains. We go back that week prior to the Green Bay game, and I'm just curious to check on it. This could be proving or denying my speculation around what's gone on. In that particular game, this is the big blow-up game for Darius Slayton. So you have 6 for 79, Barkley and Johnson both with 3 catches, 2 catches apiece for Bellinger, James, Breida, and Sills. So there's not really a big shift here. I was trying to see, like, the things that I liked, especially in this last game, is Daniel Bellinger, and then obviously the different dynamic that Wan'Dale Robinson was bringing. So the last 2 weeks have offered some more variety and a little bit more consistency from that wide receiver room. Go back to that 2012 game, 20-12 victory, over the Chicago Bears, when you saw Bellinger with 3 catches. And this is really what I'm talking about. 3 for 23 for Bellinger, not 3 for 30 plus, 3 for 23, right? So averaging under 10 yards a catch. Tanner Hudson with the 1 long grab, 2 for 16 for Saquon Barkley, 1 for 11 for Darius Slayton, 1 catch for James, 1 catch for Sills. So you can see, right, the targets, the volume, and the conversion of those looks has gotten progressively better here over these last couple of games. Speaking of, by the way, want to talk about Daniel Bellinger, but let's take one more look here over in the chat. Our defense is getting turnovers. That matters too, right? We talked about it going back a couple of games and saying this Giants defense just can't seem to get a turnover when it matters most. Now, back-to-back weeks, closing out games, defensive side of the ball, being disruptive. And again, whether it's the long passes or not, they're able to get that done. 2 weeks ago, it was the key moment there as the game closed out. This past game against Baltimore, it was multiple times, right? Mistake on the snap. Okay, it's up to Lamar Jackson to protect that football. And when he makes the active choice that I'm going to try to make something happen, then it's on Julian Love and the Giants defense to punish them for taking an extra risk, right? And that's, I think, a lot of what we've seen here from the Giants defense is teams are not taking big risks against them. Even go back to that Packers game. Those deep shots they're taking, they're kind of in these no man land spaces. The ball's a little off the mark. You're staying away from the coverage. If you can hit one, great. Team that's trying to find its rhythm, as we obviously know with Aaron Rodgers in that wide receiver room. But you're keeping people averse from trying to take too big of a risk and put themselves in too big of a hole. That has benefited the New York Football Giants defense. But now these last couple of games, and specifically the Ravens game, now take advantage of it. And by the way, getting Leonard Williams back mattered, right? Dexter Lawrence, who's only gotten better since, and we said this a few weeks ago, when Leonard Williams went out, all of a sudden Dexter had to play 85, 90, 95, 97% of the snaps, and he's gotten better because of it. Like, we have not seen that in his career. His percentage snap counts have always been in the 60s to 70s sometime, and you're always rotating him through. I think that it makes a huge difference that he plays more reps. It doesn't mean that he's going to be dominant every single rep, but when he's out there, I think that there's certainly a cumulative impact of just having his big body going up against the opposition, punishing that offensive line, whether making opportunities for himself or for someone else. So all these things matter when we're looking at the way that these games have been created, the opportunities that are being made for this defense, and how they can capitalize on it. Fabian Moreau rated a top 10 shutdown corner by Pro Football Focus from Charles Barkley. I don't think this is the real Charles Barkley. It could be. He was on TNT last night. He could be over here now checking it out. Yeah, listen. This is that tricky spot where, by the way, he's played well. Monroe has come in and he's played well. I think sometimes what I always wait for with guys that maybe come out of nowhere or have been around and are now having a nice stretch is, can you continue to do it? And by the way, there's guys inside Wink's system that can continue to do it because they've shown it from weeks 1 all the way through now heading into week 7. If he can continue to play this way, it greatly changes the risk inside of that secondary. We know Robinson up and down with the injuries. We know that Darnay Holmes, who looks so good in training camp in the preseason, has had his struggles. But with the way Julian Love is playing, with Xavier McKinney, with Adoree Jackson, now all of a sudden, and then Cordell Flott, hopefully as he gets rotated in with some of his injury issues, Dane Belton on the back end there as well, right? All of a sudden, you're just saying, we have some pieces. We have some pieces that we can put into favorable matchups. If you take the quality play of Monroe off of the defensive side of the ball, now more pressure is put onto Adoree Jackson to almost play perfect on whatever his assignment's going to be. And then you get a layer deeper in the depth chart and start to say, hey, are we risking getting overexposed here once again? Because we know between talent and then also injuries, the Giants have had to shuffle the deck here a number of times, to say nothing of what's gone on at that linebacking core as well. We got Monroe just getting some more praise for him there. And then hating on Barkley because he was injured and saying he sucks was just as silly. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Tariq. This could be a conversation that's happening inside of the chat, which I'm happy to be a part of as well. Defense turnovers wise, I think we're going to bust out soon. That's from Bry as well. So just a little look in over at the chat there. Obviously, the two players, when we just turn our attention briefly back to this game and to the Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously we know the Jacksonville Jaguars made it a point in the draft to try to add defensive value to their team, and they did it in two ways. They started out by obviously bringing, and they still have couple of other nice members here. But let's stay focused on, you already had Josh Allen there. They added in Devin Lloyd in the draft as well. But then Trayvon Walker was the big pickup for them in the draft, certainly. And he's come in so far this season and to the tune of just 1 sack so far, 12 solos, 10 assists, has 1 interception in there as well. I think that this is the other part of that I think, again, similarities. You always kind of look for similarities between two teams. I think that sometimes you look at a player like Lloyd and like Walker and you go, any game could be the breakout game, could be a monster game, right? Any game could be where they make big impact plays, just like with Kayvon Thibodeau, right? Just like Azeez Ojulari in his second year, just like we're thinking about Dane Belton, any of these young players. And that's sometimes what I worry about a little bit. Now, this offensive line has had some great stability over the last couple of weeks. We've seen some guys playing stronger for them. And all of a sudden, we talked about those PFF grades by whatever metric in with the eye test as well, that, man, all of a sudden you look across the offensive line and you go, they're starting to show some level of consistency inside of the pass blocking game. That was critical. Run blocking, they've been doing, but pass blocking, just enough, just consistent enough to start to give some real opportunities to this offense. So can they hold up against some of these dynamic playmakers for Jacksonville? Sure. And by the way, when we talk about Jacksonville, it's not as if we're going to take a look at their defensive stats here quickly. But when you go inside their schedule, listen, they opened up the season losing to Washington, giving up 28 points. Now they shut out the Colts, who were a total disaster to start the year. They held the Chargers, who were dealing with a ton of injuries, to 10 points. And then over these last 3 weeks, the truth is somewhere in the middle here. 29 points against Philly, 13 points against Houston, but again, all in losses, and then 34 points against the Colts, right? So we're coming back, I think, to what is closer to the truth than not from the early season. They're a team that can give up points. It's just a matter of, they give up a lot of passing yards. They only give up 89 rushing yards per game. Is that a fact of teams are able to lean towards the passing game and take advantage of that? And if so, are the Giants and Daniel Jones going to be capable of exposing that area? Or are we going to have to force our own narrative, which has been successful? Saquon Barkley running the football, wearing teams down. If you have to get away from that because maybe Jacksonville shows they can hold up, are you going to be capable of pushing that ball in the passing game and having some success? I wanted to talk about, there was a great article on Daniel Bellinger, speaking of some of the PFF stats. This one came out from NJ.com from Bob Brookover, NJ Advanced Media for NJ.com. So Bellinger, who said, by the way, that his father sends him some of these notifications around where he is stacking up. And that is because, as it stands right now, so there's a good article comparing Trey McBride, Colorado State, who went out this old Mountain West battling tight ends that are now at the NFL level. And then you also had Derek Deese, who was out there as well. And Myrick came out and said, I wonder if someone's kicking themselves for that in terms of who they're taking, who won some accolades at the college level, like Derek Deese, who is second-team tight end, and an honorable mention on the conference list in college, and then McBride, who was ranked as the first-team tight end in Mountain West. So those accolades are cool to have, but in a league, if you can play, you can play. Maybe that put a chip on his, referring to Daniel Bellinger's, shoulder. And so number 4 right now is Daniel Bellinger in the tight end NFL landscape 6 weeks into the season by Pro Football's metrics. Daniel Bellinger does not care too much. I know what it is, Bellinger said when asked about PFF. I don't look at it too much. I try to focus on what my coaches are saying. My dad likes to send me that stuff, but I like to focus on what I'm doing here for me. That stuff is not that important. I just want to keep growing as a player, but I guess being recognized is kind of cool. Beyond what he has done, because we've seen that growth, and Mike Kafka mentioned ahead of that Green Bay game in London that he was getting there. He was starting to be deserving of more opportunities in both the pass and pass protection, run protection grade. And I wanted to get down to this one here. When we talk about Bellinger, as he say, at times it could be frustrating, Bellinger admitted, but for me, and he's referring to the opportunities that he got at the college level or lack of opportunities, he said, but for me, I try to think of it more as, what is the best way that I can help the team win? always a positive for the Giants fans to be hearing. So if it was getting as many targets and I had to stay into block, it always felt good to know I was helping the team win instead of getting those targets. I looked at the record at the end of the day, and we had 12 wins, and I think Colorado State had 3 or 4. I liked looking at the wins a lot more than my targets. So again, not only is he getting some targets and being productive for the Giants now in the season, he's also coming in with the right perspective. It's about the wins, not about, as Elijah Moore for the New York Jets may say, my targets. Why aren't I getting more targets, even if the team is winning? There was one other piece that I really liked in this, and I want to make sure that I get to it. This I thought was interesting too. According to a story as referenced in this article from the San Diego Union Tribune, Daniel Bellinger ranked 4th in the 40-yard dash, tied for 1st in the bench press, tied for 3rd in the vertical jump, was 1st in the broad jump, and tied for 4th in the 3-cone drill and 7th in the 20-yard shuttle. So many of his measurables indicate that if given the opportunity, he could be successful. And we take the side trip here. And then, by the way, friends, we're going to take one more break before we come back in and talk about some non-Giants related stuff. Although I shouldn't even say that. It is going to tie into the New York Football Giants here in a second. But so much of when we do our scouting stuff, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm the perfect scout because I'm not, because I don't do it for a living. But there have been times when you go and watch tape, and if I don't know, because I don't follow the college game on a week-to-week basis throughout the NFL season, I'm not watching all of these players. But the one thing, as I try to knock something terrible out of my eye, the one thing that I do like to do is, by not knowing or caring what school the player went to, if I can go and watch his tape and say, I like what I see, that's where the baseline starts. Do I think he can function at the NFL level? Do I think he has the skill set that benefits the New York Football Giants? When they drafted Daniel Bellinger, it became that. It became, let's go take a look. And all of a sudden, you start to say, okay, I know we heard about a lot of other tight ends, and we were talking about other potential options. I like what this kid does. And he does look like, whether you can go down the list, right? Boss, you can go down, someone's mentioning modern day Bavaro. There's so many not super athletic looking, just getting the job done kind of tight ends in the New York Football Giants franchise history. And it looks like Daniel Bellinger is following that mold. And by and large, when they have that type of tight end, that's where the team has had more success. There was one other thing that I really liked here as well. And that was it was about the tight end group overall. And I don't know if I'll be able to track this here, because it was really good to see that all of the tight ends for the New York Football Giants were rated, I believe, among the top when it came to run blocking, which is impressive given the fact that the New York Giants had some instances where we specifically had called out, everybody did, calling out that the tight end room had struggled in some key sequences. But again, it's about learning the offense and getting better. I'll see if I can track that one down. I do not see that here in front of me right now, but it was a really positive stat that included Myrick, that included Tanner Hudson, and just saying this is a group collectively that is starting to get the job done. We take one more brief timeout, and then we want to come back in and take a look at NFL news. Christian McCaffrey gets traded to the San Francisco 49ers. There's quite the haul associated with it. I want to break down how much it took to get McCaffrey from a bad Panthers team to a playoff bound, they like to think, San Francisco 49ers team. And just in the spectrum for Joe Schoen as he approaches this trade deadline, what is he looking at in terms of not even someone calling him, as Giants fans want to push away any of that type of talk, but also the cost of going out and trying to bring in talent to help continue to build this roster. We take a look at your comments in the live YouTube chat and break down this seismic NFL trade next. Okay, so a couple of last notes here. We'll take a look at the comment section, see how you guys are feeling, and then get into this Christian McCaffrey trade. But even before that, I will say, as Charles Barkley dropped that dime against the Cowboys, yes, it hasn't. I'm not saying that the tight end room has been perfection, but go back to preseason and training camp. Did you think Tanner Hudson was going to be a guy that you looked at and said, hey, he's performed well for us overall, right? So expectations, I think, are also a big part of this. We've talked about this with young players on the roster over the course of the season, like getting frustrated with, now that the team is winning games, especially getting frustrated with players that the bar was relatively low for them. And I'm not saying that that's the case here for you, Barkley, but getting frustrated with a player like that when the expectation, it's like David Sills. I'm not like frustrated with him that he drops a pass or slips and ends up being an interception in that same Cowboys game. Like, I don't care about that. Why? Because David Sills is a 6th or 7th string or practice squad wide receiver. And because of circumstance, he's been elevated to a bigger role. So I'm not going to chastise guys for looking like someone that shouldn't be out there getting major reps when most metrics and stats and indications and eye tests tell you, yeah, that's exactly why they're not, right? It's why they haven't been a big part of offenses over the years, why they are 27 and still hanging on, to practice squads throughout the league. That being the case, though, last night, there's two real quickly on this Thursday night football game, which the Arizona Cardinals won. This is just like, hey, let's all be happy about this. Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray get into it on the sidelines with his head coach. And even though that team won that game, good Lord, is there chaos in Arizona. And if there's one thing that I appreciate, along with so many others, but if there's one thing that I really appreciate about this season, you're not wondering about what is Joe Judge talking about in post-game press conferences. You're not wondering if the GM is going to, make bold proclamations around how he feels about a player versus what the perception is. There's no BS involved in this year for the Giants. Everyone's always going to debate, is Daniel Jones the quarterback? Is this team really as good as being 5-1? Can they go to the playoffs? Could they make some noise? All that stuff is a part of the season and being excited and frustrated on a week-to-week basis. But there's none of that crap hanging over top of this organization. And that's a good thing, especially in a year where you don't know. We don't know how the rest of the year is going to play out. We got a lot of division games on tap. We got some difficult matchups later in the season. But you don't have to worry about that narrative coming in here. You don't have to worry about, listen, you take credit wherever you can, give credit wherever you can get it. We saw, I think, Kadarius Toney thinks he's getting closer. Not going to be back this weekend. But at least you haven't heard anything from him either, though. Elijah Moore, I mentioned him earlier, is on the New York Jets, who are winning football games. They're 4-2, and he's complaining about targets. Denzel Mims came out and complained before the season even began that he wasn't satisfied with his role. I'd be shocked if Kadarius Toney was doing it, given the fact that he hasn't even been on the field. But you don't have any of that type of conversation coming out. Kenny Golladay has been the one blip on that radar, and it was one time in a post game in the locker room, a little bit of frustration expressed, but by and large, he's been quiet. Also, he's been hurt as well. So that being the case, just a little footnote around all the things that have gone right. We talk about things breaking right for the Giants in games. They're also breaking right for the Giants out of games. Everything just seems to be a really positive season for the Giants in so many facets. That being the case, the Christian McCaffrey conversation. So November 1st is the trade deadline, so just after Halloween there. And the NFL had the first big trade. That was the Carolina Panthers. They're going to trade running back Christian McCaffrey to the 49ers, which included a 2023 second, third, and fourth round pick, plus a fifth rounder in 2024. Supposedly, the Rams were in the conversation, and the Buffalo Bills were rumored to also be in there as well. So here's where I think it's interesting, and it's twofold. We have, when you look at Christian McCaffrey, so I was thinking about it from two ways, and it's a little bit tricky, I guess, when we think about like what does his season look like to this point, because Carolina had been so bad to start the year. They fired their head coach. They traded Robbie Anderson. Now they traded Christian McCaffrey. Like it's a trickle down effect here. It's happening fast for the Carolina Panthers as the wheels fall off. But to this point, Christian McCaffrey, who's already now, they already have him listed there, Christian McCaffrey, 49ers. So this season, he had rushed 85 times for 393 yards, 4.6 clip, 2 touchdowns. More, I think, even surprisingly for me, which I had talked about a little bit, was his receiving numbers for me early in the season when it came to the Carolina Panthers. That was a curious one. Now, I had to, they still have him listed in the correct way as far as his game log goes. So again, he started the season with 5 targets, 4 targets. Those are the first 3 games, 24, 26, and 7 yards. Then in the last 3, although they were all losses, which what can you do? You're the Carolina Panthers. 7 catches on a combined 29 targets. So they clearly finally got him back into the formula. And when we're talking about from a San Francisco perspective, I think that what he's going to do in the passing game is as dynamic and dangerous as what he's going to do in the running game for them. Because now if you think about Deebo Samuel and you think about Ayuk and the weapons that they have there, all of a sudden you have multiple guys that can do similar things, play out in space as a receiver, be lined up as a running back. In theory, Jimmy Garoppolo, Mr. Keep it level, right? Keep it in neutral. Don't go careening off a cliff and don't go slamming on the brakes. That's going to open things up for them. We all get that. We all understand it. But I do have the question in my mind. So now we talk about what it cost. And Christian McCaffrey didn't look as dynamic to start the season in the running or the passing game. But again, Carolina sucks. Joe Schoen, when you hear that the Rams and the Bills were in these conversations, just as a reminder, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round pick in next year's draft, plus a 5th round pick. I bring it up because some people were saying about, should the Giants and Joe Schoen be willing to go out to the market and look to improve this team? And a lot of the consensus from around the NFL is that Joe Schoen, as many GMs do, covets having the draft capital going forward and what it means for continuing the rebuilding process. Because while we're elated about what the Giants are doing in this season, even if they can win 10 games, 11 games, 12 games, it will not change the fact that they still have holes on the roster. There are still areas that they need to work on, they need to improve, they need to fill. And while they are going to have a lot of cap room next offseason, that's not the only way you go about constructing a roster. And arguably, it's not the most important way. The most important way is through the draft. So you don't want to spend capital out on the market to go pick up wide receiver X. Talk about DJ Moore and what that bill could look like to make that kind of move when you can go to free agency and spend big money on a wide receiver next offseason if you want, or go to the draft and have a cost-effective guy, seeing what happens with Kadarius Toney, etc. But it did bring up the thought to me. And we're staying so much inside this season right now, but I think because the deadline is right there on November 1st, you have to at least ask the question, will we hear that the Rams or that the Buffalo Bills came to Joe Schoen and asked, what does it look like for Saquon Barkley to be available? Now, there's 2 sides of thought to this. One, Saquon Barkley has been absolutely phenomenal, and I wouldn't want to see him gone this season with how good things have been, even just from a continuity, from a chemistry, from a good vibes kind of time. Taking away someone like that could be very disruptive, right? And I think it'd be impossible, obviously, to not think that if the Giants were to make a move, that you would automatically go, well, obviously the record's going to suffer here, right? So regardless if it was predetermined outcome or not, if the Giants made a move and then lost 4 out of the next 5 games, you go, look what you cost us when you did this. However, if Joe Schoen, these are the internal questions, and we've had these about Daniel Jones and anybody on this roster, Kadarius Toney, right? All the players that exist on this roster, what's going to happen in the offseason? So it becomes 2 questions. Do you plan on re-signing Saquon Barkley? If so, Doesn't matter. I can reject any offer in the world. I'm going to bring him back. We're going to sort out the money. We love what he means to this franchise, right? We love that in this season, Giants are 5-1. They could have been, as we're seeing, the big move could have been 1-5, could have been 2-4, whatever. Could have been winless. He's been critical to the Giants' success this season, 1,000%. And we're going to bring him back, so we don't care. The layer down from that, we're going to franchise tag him. We're going to franchise tag him next year, and we're going to wait, and we're going to see what the draft brings, and we're going to, look to continue to build pieces around it, get another good year, and then we'll take it from there the following season. Okay, you can do that, and that's a reasonable decision as well. Seems unlikely, at least in this moment. And I had another article up from Michael Lombardi, who was talking about Daniel Jones and kind of where they stand on him maybe now as a franchise. The chances that you're going to franchise Daniel Jones for what I think ends up being somewhere closer to 40 to 45 million on the franchise tag, unlikely. So maybe you're just going to re-sign him if you like what he's doing for you this season. So you still have the franchise tag option with Barkley. But if the idea, and I think Charles Barkley is pointing this out correctly, if the idea is that you are going to let Saquon walk because it has been a great season, but he is the age that he is, and you do believe you can replace him in the draft and get a low-cost option, or you believe that you're going to get a new quarterback as well, and there's going to be this process that's involved here, and this Cinderella-type season the Giants are having is great and is also not the end-all, be-all. If any of those elements are in the conversation, then Joe Schoen would be doing a disservice to the long-term success of this franchise if he doesn't at least take the calls. And if there were 3 teams, 49ers, Bills, Rams, that were in the conversation for Christian McCaffrey, you know for a fact that those last 2 teams would be in a conversation for Saquon Barkley. The question becomes, what can you provide? What is the line for a Giants fan to say it's not worth trading Saquon? I can sit here right now today and say the Giants are 5-1. I don't want to talk about any trading of any key player on this roster. I just want to enjoy this season, and I get it. But what if I told you that the Rams said we'll put a first-round pick in the conversation, or the Bills? We'll put our first-round pick into the discussion. And instead of it being a 2, 3, 4, and a 5 the next year, we're going to give you a 1, 3, 4, and a 6 the following year, whatever it may look like. Is there a line where Giants fans would say, I get it? As painful as it is, I get why we're making that decision now in this moment for what it means for the team going forward. I have always been a fan of Saquon Barkley, the person and the player. I came into this offseason saying the Giants should have tried to trade him at the draft or around the draft and see if someone wanted to come and get him. Now, arguably, it would have been for a depreciated value. I said at the time, back end third, contingency third potentially, maybe a 3 and a 5 or something along those lines. But now, it's hard to give up on this season. Like I'll acknowledge, it's hard to say we're okay with not winning more games this season. But if he's not going to be a part of the long-term future, I think you'd be a fool, and Joe Schoen would be a fool, not to answer those calls. And is a 2, 3, 4, and a 5th the following year enough? The exact same deal? Is that good enough? What if the Bills said, we'll give you 2, 3, 4, and a 5th, plus we'll throw in Zach Moss, the young running back who's behind Singletary there, and has some upside, at least would be a guy to have in the room with you, right? Look at the Rams running back room. Is there somebody in there that you would want to take on and bring into your room that may not cost you that much to have on the books? It is such a difficult question, and it's only because the Carolina Panthers completely dumpstered out of the gates this season, and they are now trading away their pieces, and there is this very 1-to-1 comp in Christian McCaffrey that can tell you this is what Saquon can be worth on the market right now. I'm fascinated to see what happens here. I wonder, man. I'll ask this over on social. I guarantee it gets dumpstered that I even bring up the idea of trading Saquon Barkley or answering the calls because the Giants are 5-1. But man, when we talk about this so often, the Giants, when they drafted Saquon Barkley second overall, the first thing I said was, I don't know what you're doing taking a running back at the second spot in the draft. And the second thing I said was, Saquon Barkley is an electric player. I can't wait to have him on the team and see what he can do, right? Because that's how it works as a fan. So objectively, we knew it was a bad idea to draft Saquon, and he's been amazing to be able to watch when he's healthy. Just like right now. It is objectively a bad idea to take away your best player on the roster, and it's a really healthy decision to make sure that you build up your draft capital in what is going to be a critical 2 to 3 year stretch as you continue the process of building this roster up. We know they're 5-1 right now, but the next phase of this team is being 5-1 and also doing it in all phases, right? And having all the complementary weapons you want, and having the stability across the line, and having another viable, consistent, present, and healthy weapon in the wide receiver room. These things all matter. They need another cornerback. They need multiple inside linebackers. Even if Darian Beavers is healthy next year and he can be the stud that plugs in the middle, which I think he can be. We all know that I love him. You still need weapons, though. You still are going to need to make decisions about paying Dexter Lawrence after next season on his fifth-year option. But where is everybody, right? Who's coming back? Who's going? Where are you spending free agent money? Having draft capital alleviates the pressure in some of those. Yeah, and Kenny Galladay's contract is screwing us too. You're darn right. If you could do that, if you could lump Kenny Galladay into a trade and say, yes, you give us a 2, 3, and a 4 for Saquon Barkley, and you take Kenny Galladay's contract, maybe that's something that pushes people over the top on some of these opportunities. The bottom line is we're obviously going to be focused tomorrow. I'll come in with Andy. We're going to have the conversation about this game, about the betting lines, about Andy's bet of the week, and where he's going to go. We'll keep Marty's Wan'Dale Robinson wide receiver touchdown in our back pocket to discuss. We'll stay focused here, man. We are narrowly focused on this Jaguars game here tomorrow heading into the weekend. That's what matters first and foremost. But again, these things are going to start to happen, right? The buzz is going to start to happen. And it'll be interesting if are the Giants buyers, sellers, or standing pat. And some of the prevailing wisdom would say the Giants are going to stand pat. They're not going to go out and look to make a seismic move in the wide receiver room. They're not going to look to jettison any of their talent. They're going to keep riding the wave that Brian Daboll has taken this team on in his first year as head coach. Maybe that's the case. We'll debate, Andy and myself, maybe next week. We'll come back to it after the Giants take on these Jacksonville Jaguars, after they hopefully improve to 6-1 on the season and continue to give New York Football Giants fans something to be happy about. Listen, guys. This is not the way I like to do podcasts, by myself, rambling on. I love it when Andy's here. We love to have the back and forth conversation, but hopefully after a couple days away, you appreciate the expansive nature of this episode. Try to give you a little bit of the game coverage, have some of these NFL narratives, obviously, too. And one thing we didn't even get to, which we will talk about probably at the bye week, is this really good article that was discussing with Mike Lombardi, who was the former Cleveland Browns GM and 3-time Super Bowl winning NFL executive. He was talking with Valentine's views about Daniel Jones, where the team is on him, that cost, the franchise tag, all those different things. And there's this team overall. It's a good conversation, and it's one that's timely inside of the season, and we can also hold in our back pocket for later this offseason when those things come back up. But again, Jacksonville Jaguars on the road. Dogs disrespected. Giants ready to win. Come back in tomorrow for that additional episode. We'll get that up. Get the podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the podcast feed. It means the world to us. It's totally free to do. Same thing with the YouTube channel. Share it, like it, review it wherever possible. It really helps us. Means a lot. Free to you. Big deal for us. Much appreciated. Woo! Until tomorrow, friends, as we continue on OGP. As Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand, you, the people, know It's awkward when it's just me. I don't throw it the right way. As always, let's go Big Blue.